You left footprints today, walking to the kitchen, maybe on a beach in wet sand, where the water pulled them apart before you even turned around. Think about how fragile a footprint is. It is the most temporary thing a body makes. A gust of wind, a wave, an hour of rain, and it is gone as if you were never there. Almost none of the steps a human has ever taken survive more than a few minutes. Now hold that in your mind and look at this. Pressed into the ground in New Mexico, there are footprints made by a person who walked across a muddy lakeshore around 23,000 years ago. Not their bones, not their tools, their actual steps. The exact spots where their bare feet pushed into the mud on a single day, deep in the last ice age. And they are still there, which should be impossible, and what they captured is even harder to believe. Start with why this matters so much, because it is different from everything else we dig up. A bone tells you a person existed. A skull tells you what they looked like, roughly how they lived, how they died. But a bone is a summary of a whole life, collapsed into one object. Cannot tell you about a single moment. Cannot tell you what a person was doing on one particular afternoon, tens of thousands of years ago. Footprint can. A footprint is not a life. It is an instant. It is one step in one place at one time, a person moving right then, going somewhere. When you stand over an ancient footprint, you are not looking at a species. You are looking at an event. A specific human being on a specific day who woke up, went out and walked and left the proof of it in the ground. The trouble is that footprints almost never last. To survive, the impression has to be made in the right kind of mud, then covered gently, then buried and left alone for thousands of years without being crushed or washed away. The odds against it are astronomical. And yet, at one dried-up lake in the desert, thousands of them survived, and they rewrote the story of how long we have been here. The place is White Sands in New Mexico, today a desert of white gypsum dunes, but at the end of the Ice Age, the shore of a large, shallow lake. In 2021, a team led by Matthew Bennett of Bournemouth University, working with scientists from the United States Geological Survey and the National Park Service, published their findings in the journal Science. And the finding was staggering on two counts. First, the footprints were human, and there were thousands of them. A whole landscape of ancient steps, adults and children, pressed into the old lakebed. Second, and this is the part that shook the field, they dated to around 21 to 23,000 years ago. To understand why that number is explosive, you have to know the old story. For most of the last century, the textbook said humans only reached the Americas around 13,000 years ago, after the great ice sheets melted enough to open a path south. White Sands blew that apart. 23,000 years ago was the very peak of the Ice Age, the coldest, harshest moment, when those ice sheets were at their largest. And there were already people here, walking the shore, raising children here, thousands of years earlier than we had believed. The dates were so surprising that some scientists challenged them. So the researchers went back. The challenge had been a fair one. The first dates came from the seeds of a water plant, and water plants can drink in old carbon and red as far older than they are. So the team went hunting for material that could not fool them in that way. In 2023, a US Geological Survey led team tested the age again, using two completely independent methods: pollen from land plants, which do not have that problem, and a technique that dates the last time buried quartz grains saw sunlight. Two clocks, built on entirely different physics, unable to share the same error. They agreed with each other and with the seeds. 23,000 years, now confirmed three separate ways. So people were here at the peak of the Ice Age. But the most human thing in that lakebed is not the dates. It is a single trail of prints and what it shows someone doing. But here is where it gets stranger and closer. Among the tracks, the researchers followed one trackway that runs in almost a straight line for more than 1.5 kilometers. And when they read it closely, a scene came out of the ground that is almost unbearably familiar. It is a single person walking fast across the mud. And every so often, the prints change. They get deeper and wider, and the shape of the step shifts, the telltale signature of someone carrying extra weight on one hip. Then, at points along the way, a second set of prints appears beside the first. Tiny ones. A small child, set down for a moment, standing on its own feet. and then gone again, scooped back up, as the little prints vanish and the deep, heavy, one-hipped steps resume. The researchers are careful, and so are we. We do not know who this was. Possibly a woman, possibly a young man. But the story in the mud is not in doubt. Someone carried a small child across that lakeshore, put the child down now and then to rest their arms, picked the child back up and hurried on. And here is the detail that stops your breath. The return journey is there 2 hours later. The same path back, but this time with no child's prints beside it. They carried the child out. They walked back alone. And crossing their path, pressed into the same mud, are the tracks of a giant ground sloth and a mammoth. This person was carrying a child through a landscape with Ice Age giants in it. Thousands of years ago, on one specific afternoon, someone did something you have done. And you already know exactly how it felt. Because you have carried a child or been carried. You have shifted a heavy, sleeping weight from one arm to the other. You have set them down for a second because your back was screaming, and then picked them up again because you were not going to leave them there. That is not a prehistoric behavior. That is Tuesday. The distance between you and the person who made those prints is thousands of years, and absolutely nothing at all. Strip away the Ice Age, the mammoths, the gypsum, and what is left is the most ordinary human moment there is. Someone getting a child from one place to another and being careful about it. The footprints are not really telling you about them. They are telling you that the thing you do without thinking, carry, protect, hurry home, is one of the oldest and most constant things our kind has ever done. 23,000 years of tools, language, cities, and empires stand between you and that person, and none of it touched this one thing. If you met them, you would not understand a word they said. But the moment you saw them shift that child to the other hip, you would understand everything. You already do. If you'd rather feel the past than just hear dates about it, subscribe. That's the whole reason this channel exists. Then stay with me a moment longer. And these are not even the oldest steps we have found. Not by a long way. Go back much further. In Tanzania, at a place called Litoli, there is a trail of footprints pressed into volcanic ash and dated to around 3.5 million years ago. They were not made by our species. They were made by Australopithecus, the small, upright ancestors that came long before us. Mary Leakey's team uncovered them in the late 1970s. And the trail shows 2 individuals walking side by side, upright on 2 legs 3.5 million years ago. One of the prints even seems to pause and turn, as if something off to the side caught their attention. A moment of curiosity, frozen in stone, older than the human mind itself. And look closer still, one of those trails is actually 2. A second individual walked single file behind the first, setting their feet down inside the prints already there, step for step. So exactly that scientists only teased the 2 trackways apart decades later. Someone, 3.5 million years ago, deliberately walking in another's footsteps. Which is the same thing you do today when you follow a line of prints across wet sand. 3.5 million years, and that has not changed either. And there are prints in England at Haysborough that are roughly 900,000 years old, the oldest footprints of any early human ever found outside Africa. They were pressed into an ancient riverbank by a small group, adults and children, walking together. They survived for nearly 1 million years. And then, only days after scientists found them exposed on the beach, the sea washed them away for good. We recorded them just in time. Their makers walked for a moment 900,000 years ago, and we caught the last glimpse of that step before it dissolved forever. A bone tells you a person existed. A footprint tells you a person was here on one afternoon going somewhere and then gone, which is exactly what your own footprints are. The only difference is time. We will never know their names. We will never know where that person was carrying their child, or why they were in such a hurry, or whether they made it home. The footprints give us the moment and take back everything around it. That is the strange grief of them. They are so intimate and so completely anonymous at the same time. But they leave us with one quiet, enormous fact. That for as far back as there have been creatures standing upright on this planet, they have been walking. Going somewhere, carrying what they loved, leaving faint marks in the ground behind them. Almost all of those marks are gone. A vanishing few survived, by pure accident, to reach across tens of thousands of years and touch you. You left footprints today and they are already gone. But you are part of an unbroken line of walkers that stretches back 3.5 million years. Every one of them going somewhere, every one of them sure the ground would forget. Most of the time, it does. Every so often, it doesn't. Footprints are the faintest thing our ancestors left. But some ancient humans left something far more deliberate. The Neanderthals buried their own dead with care on purpose. And what that means about how they thought is the next thing you need to see. Watch it and subscribe because the deeper we dig, the more human they turn out to be.